It's showtime. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm super excited today to have with me Mr. Terry McKee, who is the procurement director for KCDC, which is the housing authority right here next door to us in Knoxville. So, hey, Terry, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Megan?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. And then obviously you guys know Mr. Abhijit Varakar, who is Avero Advisors founder and CEO. Sorry that we're late today. We had some technical difficulties, but I think the overall accomplishment is that we overcame those, and we're
We
here
did.
with you all today. So let's just drive. Let's dive right into it. We can drive too, but let's dive right into it. Terry, first, I would like to for you to just tell your story. You have a unique story in that you, at one point, were the IT director and procurement director at the same time for KCDC. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was hired here in 2005 as procurement director. I think I had a different title back then, but procurement director. And then when the IT director retired, I was asked would I also manage the IT department. So I did that for 10, 12 years, something like that. They were very enjoyable times, but it was challenging. And
Yeah.
recently we separated the two functions again, and we have a full time IT director and a full time procurement director. I learned a
Okay.
lot, and it was very interesting. It was very taxing, but it was very interesting.
Right. So prior to, did you have a background in IT?
Only as a novice techie. I know I'm a little bit older than well, both of you, but I love tech and always have. And, my generation is infamous for not being tech savvy, wanting to do everything in person, but I tend to do everything online, and I'll text you and I'll email you. So that's I sort of have an affinity for tech.
Yeah, nice. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced when you had to take on that IT director role?
Fortunately, I was blessed with a great staff that knew what they were doing and were very dedicated and did it well. And I was blessed with an agency that had invested and wanted to invest in IT. So it wasn't a pile up on the interstate, if you will. We had
Yeah.
a great team and great resources. But the biggest challenge for me was beginning to try to understand some of the tech terms, the more advanced tech terms, and understand what the staff did.
Right. No, that is definitely challenging, and you're not the only one. I too still struggle with some of those buzzwords, and we talk about that all the time on our live stream. So I completely understand. So now, as the procurement director, are there any similarities that you see across departments? So, meaning when you were the IT director versus now as the procurement, are there any similarities and maybe some differences between managing both?
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. Actually, IT, HR, procurement, we're all service departments, divisions to help other staff line functions. So we're there to help internal and particularly procurement external, IT somewhat, with vendor portals, resident portals. Um, the differences are procurement is very regulated by the in government circles by the federal government, local government, state government. IT not so much. There are some laws and rules, ADA compliance and cybersecurity. There's some rules, but not so rule intense as procurement. So that's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah. So when you were the IT director, um, how did you initiate your digital transformation efforts, or did you? How did you get everyone on board um, to transform digitally?
Fortunately for me, KCDC had been underway with digital transformation when I came. I mentioned that the higher ups at KCDC were very much engaged in that. They had invested the time and financial resources, so it was well underway. I just became a champion, one more voice at the table, advocating for can we do this digitally to the extent possible. Not everything can be done digitally, but I became a cheerleader for an already existing rolling train rolling down the track. I, became the cheerleader. Let's go faster.
Yes, and how did you go about involving stakeholders in that?
So the unfortunate answer is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings along the way, particularly the last few years when we transformed from one long-term software package to another.
Mhm.
DC had been on the particular software package for pretty much forever, 30, 40 years, I guess. And then we transitioned 2 years ago, actually through the help or through the assistance of your company. You helped guide us and did the project management for 18 months, AV, 2 years.
Yeah, about.
So we had literally thousands of meetings in that, but we had to identify the stakeholders, find out what was unique to their world, what they needed, and sometimes talk them out of getting a new software to do it the old software way. That was a big challenge.
And Terry, also, I think my burning question, and we've been through this together a few times now, is your when you took over IT. I remember we were around, and it was not. It was a unique proposition, right? It's rare that you see procurement directors also take on the IT role. They may be tech savvy, but your biases as far as your own preferences versus what procurement law, which you are very deeply knowledgeable about and practices. How do those two things coexist in your head? Because I think that's the most difficult part. Because as procurement directors, you are trained to, and your experience is being risk averse and protecting everything all at once. Whereas as an IT director, you kind of have to be a risk taker and be on the bleeding edge.
You do, and that makes for an interesting dichotomy in my brain. Some sleepless nights here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But as an organization, we have traditionally been a little bit on the risk adverse side, not extreme. So before we implemented any significant IT project, we tried to calculate the potential risks. Will it take the system down an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks? And we made some calculated decisions. Maybe we need to do this over the weekend because there is some risk it could mess up and have the system down for a day. Can we afford to be down for a day? Probably not. Can we afford to be down for 15 minutes? Yeah. So yes, that is a very interesting dichotomy because good or bad, traditionally public procurement people are viewed as you got the rules, you check the box, and I'm not saying that's right, but there's some truth in that. IT has traditionally had sort of the other general perception. We're here to take risks, to make things better. How can you do better if you can't take some risks? And both of those are extreme, and they're not totally true. But it is an interesting bumping of heads. And we all survived, and I relied on staff's judgment.
Yeah, and you have fantastic staff. Going back to our first interaction, I think in 2007. But you mentioned the ERP replacement, and that's we're talking to a lot of public housing officials and professionals this month, just giving a focus on public housing in August. And one of the more recent and capstone sort of implementations you did was replacing your older system. As the purchasing director and IT director, when we went through the selection process, was it helpful that you had both hats on at the same time and didn't have to convince an IT director to go your way, or didn't have to be the one being sold to because you were the guy, you were doing both things?
Yes, I think probably organizationally speaking, it probably was better that it was just one person, because there could have been a bumping of heads if IT and procurement didn't agree. And we're large enough that we're a little more formalized, perhaps, than some housing authorities. And I'd like to think that procurement agents and IT directors are client oriented, but I know the real world that sometimes there can be reasons, and we're adamant and we stick with that. So in some ways, KCDC was probably well served having one person to convince that this is the package to go with. Not that I did anything in a vacuum, because one of my models, good or bad, is I want client buy-in on procurement and IT. When I was in charge of IT, I don't award bids, whether it's for copy paper or ERP systems, without client buy-in. I am not the one in the field using the copy paper. I'm not the one in the field using the new pickup truck or the new software. So they have to tell me that it's acceptable.
Yeah. Well, and to press on that a little more, I think it was also beneficial that you understood your IT environment deeply. Most places we go to, it's not necessarily butting heads, it's the lack of understanding. Because when you talk about putting an RFP out for a software, immediately purchasing agents are pulling out their templates they had 20 years ago when they first bought a certain thing. I know it's changing with your help and agents just keeping up with the times, but things like software as a service and hosted services, subscription fees, those things didn't exist 20 years ago. So
yes, and there's a mindset in the world that procurement and otherwise, this works last time, it's easier, quicker, more efficient to pull out whatever template it is, procurement or HR or accounting. We did it this way last time, let's just change the date on the top and move on. Not necessarily the mark of high professionalism, but that does exist. And the world, ever since I've been at a professional level, since I got my master's degree, the late 80s, the world has been changing at quantum speed. And just because you bid out copy paper last year does not mean you can do it the exact same way this year. We bought, back in my day, you bought software on a CD and installed it. I mean, who heard of that now besides people that have been around a long time? You have to stay current. My car has so much technology now that I also happen to have a 20-year-old pickup truck, and it's like Jetsons versus Flintstones. I mean, it's just so different. My truck does not even have Bluetooth. What? A truck without Bluetooth? Oh my. So it's the same in the workforce. You have to stay somewhat current if you want to be able to provide for your clients. My truck, to carry the analogy, my 20-year-old truck is fine for hauling rock, dirt, mulch, and appliances. If I was trying to use it as a work truck and ran a business out of it, it would be a disaster in 2023. No connectivity, no email, no text. And it's the same analogy of business. You have to stay reasonably current. Now, how much can any business invest to stay current as of every second, the newest and greatest? That's a balancing act. Right. But you can't be 20 years out of times like my pickup truck. Yeah. Or you're going to have a big problem with your business.
Yeah.
I love that analogy. Oh, go ahead, Abby.
No, sorry. Your career fascinates me. And we've had these discussions. You started off in county government with the school systems.
With the county.
With the county. And then transitioned over to public housing. And given our focus on public housing, I want to ask you a few questions, or tell us a few stories about what makes public housing unique, how it's different, and having your two portfolios at the same time. Did that help, or was it more difficult because it's public housing? And the perception is that there's not so much buying going on, but at the same time, when there is, it's all paperwork, it's all construction, and you're doing so much. Not anymore, I hope, but when you started in this field, it was like that. So tell us a little bit about that angle of your career.
Sure. I started in late 1988 after grad school. When I went to Knox County Procurement, we had 8-part typed purchase orders. and every clerk typist, because we had to have 4 or 5, I don't remember now, but we had 4 or 5 clerk typists, and they each had 8 colors of correction fluid: white, blue, yellow, canary, and whatever, I don't remember, green, whatever other colors. And if a mistake was made or a change was needed, they had to change it on 8 pages. Shortly afterwards, we went to a computer system that would be ancient by today's standards. I had a monochromatic screen and a 12-inch floppy drive to put things in. So, we've moved along tremendously. Now we're at lightning speed. In the story, in the old days, our outreach, procurement outreach, bid advertising, you put an ad in the paper and you posted a copy on the courthouse stairs or city office stairs. There's some official bulletin board, and then you mailed to 5 vendors, because that's all, 3, 5, 7, that's all you could afford. Taxpayer dollars, you couldn't mail to 1,000 people. So my first big technological improvement, which is, so ancient now, but we initiated a fax on demand system back in roughly 1990, I guess, something in that era. And there were vendors that were not happy. We're not investing in a fax machine. It's beeping at night, blah, blah, blah. Because back in that day, there was still a thing called long distance charges, and it was cheaper at night, so we had to do it at night. And now, of course, you would ask, what's a fax machine? If you ask me my fax number, I have no idea. So that's passé now too. But we've moved along, and now when we post bids, RFPs, or to our internet page, the whole world can participate if they want. And it's a totally different world.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many prospects still ask for faxed copies.
They do. I had to figure out how to find a fax number, get us a fax number to make sure we could fax a proposal or put it in the proposal, because that's what they wanted. So
COVID helped us move away from the paper model. We had been doing sort of a hybrid. We had an online bidding system, online vendor registration. We had maximized the vendor registration, self-serve. You go onto our webpage. COVID, however, made us move to the online bidding. We had done some, we didn't do, we did, we didn't. And then all of a sudden, our offices were closed to the public, and how are we going to get bids for what we need? So that was a good thing, in my opinion, that came out of COVID. We went exclusively to receiving digital uploads. At first, under the governor's orders, we were allowed to do email bids. And I said, well, this is silly, because we have this package. We just need to maximize it. And so sometimes, even though I'm a techie, in the scheme of organizing and prioritizing, that one just wasn't the highest priority. But COVID rearranged my priorities. So no matter how advanced we want to be, sometimes day-to-day functions slow us down until something speeds us back up.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Terry, earlier you talked about staying on the forefront or staying up to date, right? Are there any things that you read, articles that you read? How do you yourself stay up to date with the current times and transition that into your organization?
So, yes, being the person that I am, I try to read everything that I can. I belong to various chat rooms. I go to various conferences, some local, some state. AV is speaking at our fall conference, but I also go to our national groups, which have hundreds of vendors exhibit. In fact, I'm going Saturday, I'll be at that. So I stop by their booths and learn what's out there. And also, just because we do work in a governmental setting, all of our information is available, and we get emails all the time and or calls from people. We have the newest, best, fill in the blank, tech or otherwise, and we want your time. And as a public servant, I'm obligated to at least consider those. So between my intentional efforts and magazine, well, they're typically e-magazines now, and chat groups and best practices and so on, it's pretty easy. Much easier than in the day when everything came through the United States Post Office and I had a stack a foot high to read at any given time. And our national procurement organization in the last 10 years or so has developed what they call global best practices, sort of like in the medical field, it's the standards of care, somewhat analogous. It's not forced on any government agency, but it sets out here's typically the best practice in fill in the blank. And that's
Right.
another way to stay reasonably current because those are put together by real practitioners that whether they deal with technology or policy and procedures manuals. And again, I think I think I wrangled you into serving on one of those
Yeah.
about cybersecurity, I believe, and procurement.
Yeah. No, that was eye opening, and it was a good experience, Terry. Thank you. And so is the I'm excited for the ETPA,
Our fall conference,
the
yes.
fall conference, because we're talking about all things AI and how it's going to change,
Ooh.
how it's changing public procurement.
Yes, we, like any other organization, we run the gamut from what is AI to, woo, I can't wait for AI. So, you'll be educating us. And also, a lot of us know it conceptually. I've seen things on various news outlets and panic stories from others. And I think the truth lies somewhere between the panic and the it's the savior kind of models. But it can lead to a lot of efficiencies, I suspect, in the next few years, much like personal computers did. Back to my 8-part purchase order story that we mailed every one, and I had to sign every one of those back in the day. And now, the software just emails purchase orders. You one time set up a vendor, and when we click the final button, it's gone through digital and it's delivered. And there's good and bad. Some vendors are ready for that, some are not. But as a business, and government is a business, it's much more efficient than paying for postage, paying to print all that stuff. And back in the day, we printed, and probably before y'all's time, but we printed all that on perforated paper at night, dot matrix printers, because it was so noisy. Had the giant baffle chambers. Inevitably, you're printing 200 purchase orders at 2 a.m, and about 3/4 of the way through, the perfed paper ripped, and they all printed askew from 175. Then you reprint them. So we've come a long, long way.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be. You're right. This moment is much like when the PC came out, or when the internet got more popular. I think given our labor market conditions right now, I think it's a great time, and especially for you, given how savvy you are with tech. I think there's a lot to explore. This morning, Terry, because we respond to a lot of RFPs, and I plugged in an RFP into an AI engine, and I asked it questions. Instead of having to go through a 200-page document, I was now saying, is there a bond requirement? Do they need an MBE certification? And what is the scope? And it was giving me the answers. So that's one quick way we are starting to use it. And I think there's applications galore on your side.
Oh, definitely, because I see the potential. Not that I'm visionary, but I've read other people, and I quickly see their perspective. We may be able to eventually save a lot of, if you will, typing time, pulling together bid specs. Now typically we pull that last time we bid it, start updating, or email our peers around the city, the state, the nation. But maybe AI can start pulling a lot of that together for us to fine tune rather than starting from scratch. And somebody on one of our chat groups recently had it write a procurement song about the pros of procurement. So I think there's a lot of fun potential and potential that's more depth, of course. And I already know that a lot of chat groups or chat services for vendors already use AI to start routing. I'm not really typing to a person at first anyway. It's AI and it's routing things. Then all of a sudden that may be transferred to a person.
Yeah.
Well, as opposed to a procurement FAQ, let's talk about a really big agency like the Chicago Housing Authority. I would guess, top of my head, they probably have 20 procurement people, 50 maybe, who knows. So instead of having some sort of call screening, their users, their vendors may have some sort of chat function, and it's really AI narrowing it down. Then it gets it to the appropriate buyer or head of procurement or accounts payable. So there's a lot of potential. I think it'll be another, if you'll pardon the historical reference, industrial revolution. I think it'll be that big.
Mm-hmm.
It already is. I think in the next next 6 months you should be able to see some benefits of it directly to you and your agency. It's particularly for a housing agency. A lot of a big part of the bottleneck in serving customers is how many caseworkers you have, how many people you have for intake.
Yeah.
The churn is massive there with people coming and going, and I think AI is going to help you get conversational bots on your website, or just someone walks into a new job as a caseworker should be able to access archived information, not just for the customer that's in front of them.
Yes, and I think it'll lead to a lot more efficiencies and effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Like any industrial type revolution, personal computer revolution, internet revolution, there will be growing pains. It's going to help here, it's going to affect jobs there.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually society has a way of working through these. So there'll be some pain. But the outcome should be tremendous improvement in efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah. Terry, I want to ask, what advice would you give to someone in an executive leadership role of a housing authority who, they know that they have these antiquated processes and they're using paper, and maybe they don't even want to think about AI, right? I know we just had a great conversation around AI, but they haven't even gotten their paper processes fixed yet, right? So what advice would you give them on where to start? Where do I begin with a project this big?
They need to assume they're going to take small bites at a time. Most housing authorities, as AV alluded, we're small. I mean, we're considered large, but compared to our Knox County government and city of Knoxville government, we're small, and we're considered large in housing authority circles. So most of us don't have the capacity we're going to digitize this entire housing authority by the end of the year. Not unrealistic. You're probably going to most likely crash and burn. Pick some attainable goals, probably get some outside perspective / help. How I think housing authority personnel are happy to talk to each other. So if you know a neighbor that's digitized the application process, talk to that neighboring housing authority. If you need vendor assistance, then you're probably going to need to hire someone like your company, or there's a multitude of companies, but you may have to find some assistance. But start maybe with your neighboring housing authorities, or one you've heard about somewhere in your state or another state that's considered outstanding, or just leverage some relationship you have. Maybe the housing authority director in Xville, Missouri, and you have a good relationship. Call her and talk to her, email her, as your personal traits may be, and feel her out for how did you go about digitizing the application process, what went wrong, what worked. But don't be scared to hire a consultant, a assisting company to move forward. We do not have unlimited time, or we don't know everything. So sometimes we do need consultants, and whether for time, knowledge, or both.
Yeah. Terry, back to your, let's go back to maybe 2 years ago when we were in the process of selecting a newer system. And I don't like naming names in these conversations, but there seemed to be there's a dearth of choices when it comes to public housing, in terms of replacing a large scale older ERP system with what? Now you put an RFP out and you get 3 or 4 similar looking proposals, and it can be a little disheartening because you feels like you're going from the frying pan into the fire, or the other way around. Either way, it's not very good. What's been your experience in the last 3 years? Because you've had a long time to see it coming, and then deliberately planning. You guys did it right, commendably. You didn't just go and buy the first thing that was proposed to you, but you had a very stringent process of selection. Is that still the case in the market? How's it evolving?
It's a limited pool of software
Yeah.
packages dedicated to housing authorities. And apparently, what's happened is some of the larger ones have gobbled up some of the smaller companies through the years, decade. So there are fewer choices. We are considered a large housing authority. And as far as total ERP packages, I think we had 2 or maybe 3 proposals. And then there were people that proposed just on the financial side, quite a few. But it is a limited market, and it's a fairly limited market in the government sector at large.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as conversant anymore, but probably 5 or 6 major government packages also. There's just not. It's a lucrative market, but it's a limited market.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just a reality you have to deal with, that you're not going to have a ton of choices. You need to do all you can to make your need as attractive as possible, understanding there's just not a lot of choices. Not that they're not necessarily great choices. There's just not a lot of choices. Okay.
No, I think looking at it from a holistic perspective, you may, going forward, given what we talked about AI and who knows what people are cooking up. But my theory is, if you found out about this in the news, this is what the powers at Microsoft and OpenAI want you to know, and they're building something that's really going to be revolutionary. So I suspect that we'll see microprocesses and best of breed type modules come in and solve specific problems, because these larger systems, they'll claim to do it all. They might do 20% of it well. The 80% is work in progress always. So
good observation. Yeah. And even in best case, an ERP system, it is very difficult to be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. Typically, you're going to concentrate on finance, and everything else is sort of an add-on. You're going to concentrate on the housing portion, and everything else is an add-on. You're going to concentrate on procurement, and everything else is an add-on. That one's a joke. But you cannot concentrate on everything. Think about running a city. You cannot typically do really well doing court administration, tax collection, procurement, human resources, the treasurer. Most software people do not have that total expertise. Mm-hmm. Housing authorities are very similar. We don't levy taxes, and we don't typically have police. We might, but typically not. So try to say you're going to know everything HR, you're going to know everything procurement, everything finance, everything about HUD regulation on housing and housing resident applications, vouchers. It's just not feasible. So they typically ERP packages concentrate on a core area, and the rest of us, unfortunately, procurement is typically an add-on. Mm-hmm. A good software package gets to know HR people and learn what they need. They learn what procurement people need, what budget people need. A poorer ERP system or less effective ERP system may not really try to get to know HR people, procurement people, to find out what our needs are. It's just like, yeah, you get what you get, and then that handicaps agencies. If your HR, and not all ERP systems have HR, and they don't all have procurement. But if it has HR or procurement or budget, and they don't really involve those people in helping develop the software, the entity is going to be handicapped at the end of the day.
Well, and I think
sorry, Maggie.
You're probably going to say the same thing. I guarantee you.
I don't know. We'll see. Try me.
Okay. You go first.
There's also the, vendor community not putting the time in to understand. And that's, you're alluding to that, but you did a good job during your implementation. I would consider, yes, it was bumpy, like all of them are, but having done the process studies and the requirements and knowing for the most part what you wanted this thing to do, rather than the other way around where the vendor comes in and says, well, this is all it can do,
Yes.
and do what you may with it. We had a blueprint.
It is important. It's like, go back to my truck example. When I bought that truck 20 years ago, I knew what I needed, and I also knew what I wanted, and I settled for what I needed plus some of the wants. Ford, Chevrolet, and whoever else I looked at the time, they told me what it could do, couldn't do in my price range anyway, and I made some decisions. Yes, I would love these 50 items. It only does these 48, and I'm settling for that. And that is how an ERP system is. I mean, sometimes you have to understand you're not going to get 100% of everything you want, because we all look at things from our own perspective, our own history. Terry would like to write the perfect procurement system and then sell it to every ERP system, become a wealthy person, but, so they'd have a great package. Well, the same is for HR, budgeting, finance, on and on. We all know exactly what we want. And if we got everything Terry wanted, it would have to exclude some of the core housing stuff, because any software company only has so many hours in the day also. So at best, most of them are evolving. In the way I look at life, the good companies, the better companies, are getting that feedback and constantly improving their product. They don't issue it and then 15 years later they have the first revision, and I'm exaggerating. But so Megan, what were you going to bring up?
I was going to bring up exactly what he said.
No, it wasn't.
He eventually got there, but I was just going to make a commercial for Avero, like we always do, or any consulting firm, right? To help you create that blueprint before you go out and purchase the software. But I did want to ask if you can share with us, was there ever a scenario where KCDC just wanted to go out and purchase software and hope for a one size fits all? Was there ever a scenario where a consultant may or may not have been a part of the bigger picture?
No, and being a public agency, we knew we would have to publicly solicit. So it's very important for us to quantify to the extent possible. I mean, we did not want, I don't know if you all were involved, but originally we had like a 200-page document of all of our wants and desires and needs. And we knew that ultimately people would not submit a proposal, most likely. Who's going to read 200 pages?
Right.
Not so much in the modern world.
AI is.
Yeah.
Yes. And 3 years ago, AI wasn't a
No.
public concept. So we tried to get it down to sort of the bare minimums. We had some wish list things. But it was very important to us also to have someone outside our group look at it. We had been working on it for several years before you all were involved.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't reasonable to say to the next housing authority, hey, would you review this 120-page document and tell us what you think? I mean, they have things to do too. So it was very helpful to us to hire an outside group, and you all gave us suggestions, as would any other qualified consulting firm. Change this, add this, remove that, reword this. Because we have to be marketable. Government procurement traditionally is thought of that vendors have to market to us. Well, in today's labor short world, booming economy, government procurement documents need to be marketable to potential vendors.
Right.
If just like you all, if you're responding to 50 RFPs today, and not this week, and mine comes in, it's 800 pages and it's 8 different fonts and unrealistic, and you've got 25 others to respond to.
You are preaching to the choir right now, Terry. Preaching to the choir. Guess who has to read those 200 pages every week?
It's the same with all commodities and services. You think about construction. In the East Tennessee area, construction is booming.
Yeah.
And if our bids are too restrictive and too many too long or just too many demands. And, vendors only have so many hours in the day also. We like to think that you work around the clock, but you actually have lives too. And so do construction people, so do office supply people. It's different when the economy tanks. Everybody needs us. But right now, with a booming economy, we have to market ourselves. I was also going to mention back to the earlier, when I started my career, we started getting computerized, systems didn't talk to each other. So back in 1990-ish, I had a wonderful procurement system, but it wouldn't talk to anything financial. I mean, none of them did back then. So you could now it's much more conceivable now that if you needed, say, a separate HR package because your ERP group does not even offer that, or it's just not real good. It's very conceivable, even though we might not want it, that you might have to buy a separate package and integrate it, upload data. So we've come sort of the full gamut on that too. You can actually have standalone systems to some degree that'll interact. You don't want 8 different systems, but if you had one need, you could probably integrate that. Maybe not ideal, but sometimes we do.
It's getting there.
And AI will probably help with that too.
We'll see. It's promising. If we have a audience question, are there any upcoming projects or initiatives at KCDC that you're particularly excited about? I know you guys have big construction projects coming up.
We do. We always have projects. On the IT side, nothing particular pops to mind at this moment. We're still implementing the new software, and that's going to take us another year probably to fully digest. On the non-IT side, our biggest project is going to be the revitalization of the Western Heights community. That's a multi-year, probably the next 5-year project, various phases, various renovations. It's a huge project. Right now it has 440 apartments, and so it's a huge project. You can always register with us on our webpage, and the beauty of registering with us, our system will try to email you a notice if we post a bid or proposal that you've indicated an interest in, so you don't have to look at our webpage every day. There are, in this state alone, there's pushing 1,000 different governments, and I try to have pity that if you had to look at 1,000 different web pages, assuming we all have web pages, that's all you would get done. So our system and some others enable that automated email notification, and that's a different vendor partner that we use. And registration's free and quick, so I would encourage the inquirer to do so.
Yeah, and we'll share your website and the link to procurement. And congratulations on the Western Heights. I think KCDC is one of 4 agencies in the country.
I believe so, yes.
That got funded by HUD for that project, and the plans look fantastic. So it's going to be great for the city.
It is going horse and buggy to 21st century. I mean, Western Heights was built in 1939, so it's going to be a quantum shift. I've also looked at the plans, not so much on the procurement side, but just looked at them. Going to be a couple of parks, and it's just a quantum leap, and it is funded, as you alluded. There's a huge federal grant. There's city grants, or I don't know if grants is the right word, but city money. And I think they're funding the parks and some of the infrastructure. So it's a massive, wonderful overhaul of that site.
Yes, that's so exciting. Well, I will go ahead and wrap us up today. Terry, thank you so much for joining us on our live stream. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we got a late start, and we're kind of going over here, but we do appreciate you agreeing to be on our live stream. And if there's anything we can ever do for you to return the favor, please let us know. Guys, we will share KCDC's website, their procurement in particularly that Terry just mentioned, in our live stream. And if there's anything that you want to ask after the live stream has gone live, please feel free to comment or reach out to AV or I in particularly, and we can get the questions over to Terry. So Terry, with that being said, thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.